Sexuality was always a subject that's been difficult to approach in the Arabian culture, and mainly I think that's why it's given the idea, or at least from outside the Muslim culture, we think that Islam is completely demonizing this subject, which is in fact something completely wrong. Um, Islam, if we look into the way that it approaches this subject, either in the Quran, by referral, of course, referring to it because of the subtlety of the Word of God, as well as in the traditions of the Prophet, we would see that sex is in general presented as one of the multiple gifts of the grace of God. Because through actually this gift, there is multiple gifts. The first is, of course, procuring. So that's the way to get its own children, its own descendants, with all the benefits and the pleasure that comes with having own children. It is also intended to fulfill psychological and physical needs that we have, and even just for the pleasure part of it, which is completely legitimate. In fact, Islam has no issue in showing or in promoting this part, the pleasure part of sex and own sexuality, if it goes through the legitimate channel, which is marriage. That's here actually where we have restrictions, because Islam would legitimize the intimacy only between a married couple. So it has to be a couple that's married, and he will talk about men and women, and of course this marriage should be recognized by the community. So there are certain rules that and traditions. The rules would come from the religious side, and also of course we have to observe any traditions that are going in the area. This could be integrated as long as it's not contradictory to the set of rules presented by the Islam itself. Once, of course, we fulfill this and there is recognized marriage, then in fact there is not a lot of restrictions. To the contrary, as I mentioned before, it is even encouraged to fulfill this need and not to keep itself under the tension or any sexual tension that can happen. Now, what is actually forbidden is to promote erotism or pornography. Now, this is here, these are details of the subject of the sexuality, but these details are the ones that are seen as negative. And in fact, through a set of exercises and advices, there are actually a lot of ways that or a lot of rules that are introduced to be prevented, like keeping control of what people see. There are parts of the that men cannot see in women, unless, of course, they are their wives. Again, the same thing for women. So that's one of the things, and then it goes in general, advising not to let self free in front of temptations. And there is a lot of exercises that are presented again by the Islamic education to help actually to move away from temptations. First of all is, of course, to keep itself distant from all what would draw oneself into temptation. Then in case we cannot have access to marriage, and through this of course to sexual relationships, to pray more, to more fasting. So these are rituals that would help to increase the spirituality and to control our sexuality. Now, when it comes to the back to the married couples, there is hardly any restrictions, unless of course we're talking about relationships that would not involve the reproductive tract. But then when it comes to the foreplay, any preparations that we might think for this relationship, this is surprisingly actually advised and even encouraged. We would not find this in the Quran itself, but through the traditions of the Prophet, who would give more highlight on the importance of all these preparations, in order not to think of the sexual relationship just as a fulfillment of an urge, or a way, or truly just a way to procure and have children. Because again, just the idea of having pleasure of sex is completely accepted. At the end of the day, the subject is, we're talking about a gift from God to the humanity. So of course, in this regard, it's a kind of also reward that the couples can have from each other, and it represents also the ultimate bond between men and women. Anything that goes out of this, out of fulfilling this need through this legitimate channel, is actually then forbidden, including self-pleasure. And the reason that Islam gives is that it avoids any or anything that might cause any psychological or physical damage or harm. On the other hand, the use of contraceptives, for example, that's completely okay. Islam has nothing against that, unless it would be something permanent, so it would interfere with the productivity of the man or the woman, or if it might do any harm to any of them. Now, in this case, of course, this falls into the part where it would be forbidden, because the rule is not to do harm at all. In the afterlife also, even though there would not be a lot of details, because again, especially in the Quran, there would be just referral to sex and sexuality, but there would be no clear verses that talks clearly about it, and this is to avoid any erotism, because of course this is, as Muslims take it, this is the word of God, and the word of God has this noblesse and subtlety, of course, not or to go above these let's say erotic references, but even in the afterlife, it's considered as one of the gifts that men and women will have, as they will, or as their other needs would be fulfilled. Also, again, this is something that would be, or that's something that's also promised in the afterlife. So it was just to mention, in fact I uploaded this subject because I got so many times not just the feeling, but clearly so many non-Muslims told me about how they are surprised, saying that Islam is completely banning this subject, which is not true. In fact, in our fiqh, the fiqh is actually the code or the set of codes and conducts that are that's been developed by scholars, by Muslim scholars, through what was mentioned in the Quran or in what was mentioned in the traditions of the Prophet throughout centuries. And it's a big subject, and in fact it goes into so many details that I'm sure so many would be surprised if they get into these details, because again the idea is that sexuality is a basic part of every human being. It has nothing evil about it. It's a necessity, and it is, as I mentioned earlier, even a gift of God. But it's what Islam is against is the abuse of this gift, or trying to get it out of the legal channel.